Welcome, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I thought the funeral of the man I had an affair with would be the hardest thing I'd ever face. But I never imagined it would end with me in handcuffs, my world crashing down as my husband learned the truth I had so carefully hidden. My name is Laura Bennett, and I've been married to Greg for 8 years. In many ways, ours was the kind of marriage people admired from the outside. We were partners, teammates in every sense of the word. We had a rhythm, a way of communicating with just a glance, and a quiet understanding that whatever came our way, we would face it together. But as with most marriages, what lies beneath the surface is often more complex than it seems. Greg was the kind of man who made people feel safe. He had a quiet strength that wasn't boastful, but deeply reassuring. He wasn't just my husband. He was my rock, the steady force in my sometimes turbulent world. When we first received the devastating news that he was infertile, Greg was the one who consoled me, even though I could see the weight of the revelation in his eyes. It was as if he had taken it upon himself to shoulder the blame, even when there was none to assign. He would hold my hand and say, "We're still a family, Laura. It's just you and me against the world." But those words, no matter how lovingly spoken, didn't fill the emptiness I felt. I wanted to be a mother. I had dreamed of it since I was a little girl, imagining the feel of tiny hands clutching mine, the laughter of a child filling our home. That dream was a part of me, woven into the fabric of who I was. And though I tried to bury that longing, it gnawed at me, slowly creating cracks in our seemingly solid foundation. At first, I told myself that Greg's attitude was enough, that his unwavering support and optimism could replace what was missing. But over time, I began to notice the small voids between us. We talked, yes, but our conversations had lost their depth. We shared a bed but seldom touched. We laughed, but our joy felt muted, as if we were performing for an invisible audience rather than truly connecting. Last year, everything changed. Those small cracks in our marriage turned into chasms, and I fell into one. His name was Adam Pierce, a colleague from another department at work. Adam was everything Greg wasn't: bold, magnetic, and spontaneous. He had this energy about him, an intensity that made you feel like you were the only person in the room when he spoke to you. At first, I didn't think much of him. He was just a coworker, someone I exchanged pleasantries with during meetings. But over time, our interactions began to shift. It started innocently, as these things often do: shared jokes during team lunches, coffee breaks that stretched longer than they should have. I told myself it was harmless, that I was simply enjoying the company of a friend. But Adam had a way of breaking through my defenses. He noticed things about me, small things that even Greg no longer seemed to see. "You look tired today. Everything okay?" He'd ask, his voice laced with genuine concern. Or, "That color suits you, Laura," when I wore a dress I'd nearly forgotten I owned. Each comment felt like a tiny spark, igniting something I hadn't felt in years. The shift from harmless to dangerous was so gradual that I almost didn't notice it. One day, we were laughing over coffee in the break room. The next, he was brushing a stray hair from my face, his touch lingering just a second too long. Before I knew it, we were meeting outside of work. At first under the guise of professional collaboration, but soon the lines blurred entirely. I wish I could say I wrestled with guilt, that I agonized over my choices. But the truth is, in those stolen moments with Adam, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. He filled a void I didn't even fully understand until he was there, and I let myself get swept away. Greg, bless his heart, never suspected a thing. He trusted me implicitly, especially since my work required frequent travel. He would kiss me goodbye at the door, telling me to call him when I landed. And I would, of course. I would call him, tell him I loved him, and mean it. Because I did love Greg. I still do, in a way that's hard to explain. But love, it turns out, isn't always enough. I hid my secret life well, or so I thought. Every time I returned home to Greg, I would look at him and wonder how he couldn't see the change in me. Did he not notice the guilt in my eyes or the tension in my shoulders? Or was he simply choosing not to see, content to live in the illusion of the life we'd built together? Adam and I spent countless hours together, weaving dreams of a future we both longed for, but could never truly claim. Those moments weren't just fleeting indulgences. They were a lifeline for me, a window into a world where I felt seen, heard, and cherished. Adam wasn't just a fling. He was my escape from a life that had grown cold and predictable. With him, I dared to imagine a life where love wasn't constrained by societal expectations or the obligations of my marriage. We talked about everything, about children, about what kind of home we'd build, about the kind of life we'd lead if only we were free to love each other without fear. For the first time in years, I felt alive, like I had a reason to wake up each day. But as the months passed, something shifted. Adam, once so carefree and full of optimism, became distant, consumed by a paranoia I couldn't quite understand. He started noticing things I didn't at first. A black sedan parked a few houses down from his, the same car appearing in places we'd go together. He mentioned feeling like someone was watching him, following him. "It's probably just a coincidence," I said, trying to calm his nerves. But the worry in his eyes was unwavering. "I don't think so, Laura," he said one evening, his voice low and trembling. "I can feel it. Someone is watching me. Watching us." I dismissed it as stress, perhaps even guilt, eating away at him. But then I began to notice it too. The black sedan wasn't a coincidence. It appeared too frequently, in places where it had no reason to be. It would park outside his house late at night, its engine idling long after the street had gone quiet. It followed us, sometimes at a distance, sometimes closer whenever we traveled. The unease that Adam had felt now seeped into me. I started looking over my shoulder, scanning the faces of strangers in crowds, questioning the intentions of every passing car. One evening, in the dim glow of a cheap hotel room, Adam broke down. "I'm not crazy, Laura," he whispered, his voice shaky but resolute. "Someone's out there. They know about us." His vulnerability, his fear, it terrified me. Yet, I tried to reassure him, even as my own anxiety gnawed at the edges of my composure. Then, everything fell apart. One day, Adam didn't show up for work. I texted, I called, but there was no response. Hours turned into days, and my worry transformed into full-blown panic. I couldn't confide in Greg. How could I? Adam was my secret, a part of my life that Greg could never know about. But as much as I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, the dread in my chest was suffocating. Then came the news. It was a cold, gray morning when I saw the headline. "Local man found dead in motel room." My heart stopped as I read the details. His name, Adam's name. He had been murdered. The article was sparse, offering no clues about what had happened, only that his body had been discovered by housekeeping staff. The room showed signs of a struggle, but there were no immediate suspects. I felt the world collapse around me. Adam was gone. The man who had made me feel alive, who had become my safe haven, he was gone. And I couldn't grieve. I couldn't cry for him openly. Couldn't tell anyone what he meant to me. Instead, I sat beside Greg on our living room couch, feigning shock as I pretended to process the news of a colleague's death. My hands shook as I sipped my tea, my mind replaying every moment with Adam, every laugh, every whispered promise, every kiss. But the nightmare didn't end there. Greg, ever the supportive husband, insisted on accompanying me to Adam's funeral. "You shouldn't have to face this alone," he said, his tone filled with concern. His hand rested reassuringly on mine, but it only added to the weight of guilt pressing against my chest. How could I explain the storm brewing inside me when I didn't even have the courage to admit the truth? I dreaded going, but refusing would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer. The thought of seeing Adam's dead body, and the memories I wished to bury, was overwhelming. Still, I swallowed the lump in my throat, plastered on a neutral expression, and nodded. The drive to the cemetery was a blur of silence. My hands were clenched in my lap, nails digging into my palms as Greg hummed along to the soft tunes of the car radio. He seemed oblivious to my internal turmoil, occasionally glancing at me with a worried smile. As we approached the cemetery gates, my heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. As we pulled into the parking lot, a swarm of men in dark suits suddenly surrounded our car. Their stern faces and swift movements made it clear they weren't mourners. Before I could comprehend what was happening, one of them shouted, "Step out of the vehicle! Hands where we can see them!" Greg turned to me, his face pale with confusion. "Laura, what's going on?" he asked, his voice trembling. I couldn't respond. My throat felt like it was closing, and no words would come out. My mind raced as I tried to piece together what was happening, but I didn't have time to think. Slowly, we stepped out of the car, our hands raised as instructed. A woman emerged from the crowd, her sharp, dark eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. She looked like someone who had been consumed by grief and anger, her face twisted in fury. "My name is Rachel Pierce," she announced, her voice trembling with emotion, "and I'm Adam's wife." The world seemed to tilt under my feet. Adam's wife? My stomach twisted into knots as I realized the implications. He had never mentioned a wife, let alone one who would confront me in this way. Before I could react, Rachel stormed forward, pointing a shaking finger in my direction. "This is her," she screamed, her voice cracking. "This is the woman who destroyed my family. And she killed my husband." Greg stood frozen beside me. His face reflected a mix of disbelief, betrayal, and dawning horror. "Laura, what's happening?" he began, but the words seemed to die in his throat. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. Rachel continued to spill what was no longer a secret. "Your wife was having an affair with my late husband, and it happened for months under your nose." Greg was still processing the shock when Rachel produced photos and videos to him as tears streamed down her face. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. In one picture was me and Adam kissing in front of an elevator, and he saw us get more intimate after each picture he viewed. Greg's face turned ashen. He stared at the photos, then at me, his voice barely above a whisper. You lied to me. You cheated on me with someone else. Despite all I have done for you, you repaid me back by sleeping with someone else." Rachel already called the police and told them I was the one who killed her husband. "I didn't kill him," I pleaded, my voice cracking under the weight of my desperation. "I know how this looks, but I didn't do it." The police weren't interested in my protests. "Ma'am, you're under arrest," one officer said as he stepped forward. Before I could process the words, cold metal cuffs were snapped onto my wrists. Rachel's voice echoed in my ears, filled with venom and heartbreak, as I was led to a patrol car. The ride to the station was surreal. My mind replayed every moment of the affair, every stolen glance, every whispered promise. I thought of Greg, who had been nothing but loving and supportive, and how I had shattered his trust. The enormity of my mistakes hit me like a tidal wave. At the station, I was interrogated for hours. The detectives wanted details about the affair, Adam's behavior, and any suspicious activity I had noticed. I told them everything. The strange car that seemed to follow us, Adam's growing paranoia, and the escalating tension in our secret relationship. It was humiliating, laying my life bare like that, but I had no choice. As the days passed, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Surveillance footage from around Adam's home and the hotels where we had met showed the black sedan I had described. But it also revealed something I hadn't anticipated: Rachel Pierce herself. She had been following us for months, her jealousy festering into an uncontrollable obsession. Every meeting Adam and I shared, every hotel we stayed at, she had been there, lurking in the shadows, always just a step behind. At first, the investigators had believed the black sedan might be someone else's, but the footage made it clear. Rachel had been tailing Adam and me, confirming her deep suspicions. It wasn't just the affair that had driven her to madness. It was the betrayal. The thought of Adam's love for another woman consumed her, making her desperate for answers. The cameras at the motel showed her arriving hours before Adam, watching us from a distance, and then leaving just after I had checked in, as if she was biding her time, waiting for the moment her rage would boil over. When the police confronted Rachel with the footage, she broke down. Her confession was chilling. She hadn't intended to kill Adam, she claimed, only to confront him about the affair. She had followed him to a motel, the very place he had been found dead, hoping for a confrontation. She wanted answers. She wanted to demand why he had been seeing someone else, why he had lied to her, why he had broken their marriage vows. But things had gone horribly wrong. According to Rachel, she confronted Adam in the parking lot of the motel. Their argument started as a heated exchange of words, but escalated quickly. The details were murky, but Rachel admitted to losing control. Her jealousy, her anger, had taken over. She slapped him, and then, in a blind fit of rage, she pushed him hard against the side of the car. Adam stumbled, and in his attempt to regain his balance, he tripped and hit his head on the pavement. Rachel said she didn't realize the force with which she had pushed him, nor the impact it would have. She had only wanted to make him feel the pain of betrayal, not to harm him. But harm was done. Adam collapsed unconscious, and Rachel panicked. In her frenzy, she dragged his body into the motel room and staged it to look like a suicide, a plan she believed would make her appear less culpable, less insane. She didn't count on the meticulousness of the police investigation or the surveillance cameras that had been recording her every move. The police found Rachel's fingerprints on Adam's car, along with evidence of a struggle in the parking lot. It didn't take long for them to piece together the timeline. Adam's death had been no accident. It had been the result of a confrontation gone horribly wrong. He had been alive when Rachel dragged him into that room, but by the time help arrived, it was too late. The shocking revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. What had started as a simple affair had now turned into a tragic story of love, jealousy, and murder. Rachel's confession not only exonerated me, but it also painted a picture of a woman so consumed by obsession that she had been willing to destroy everything, including her own life, in an attempt to claim back what she thought was hers. The truth of what happened that night at the motel became clearer, but the damage was already done. The scandal, the lies, and the betrayal had already shredded the life I had once known. When I returned home, Greg was waiting for me. The sight of him, standing stiffly by the window, sent a cold shiver down my spine. My suitcase was packed and sitting by the door, an ominous signal that my life was about to change irrevocably. The air between us was heavy with unspoken words, accusations, and disappointment so palpable that I could almost taste it. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, as though the betrayal had sucked the life out of him. He hadn't even bothered to come to the station to meet me. Instead, he had done the bare minimum, a call to my parents to inform them of my indiscretions. No questions, no confrontation, just this silent, agonizing judgment that now filled the room. "I can't be with you anymore, Laura," he said, his voice trembling but firm. There was an edge of finality in his tone that made my stomach churn. You lied to me. You betrayed me. And now the whole world knows. I can't trust you. Greg, please, I began, my voice cracking under the weight of my guilt and desperation. I reached out a hand as if I could physically pull him back to me, to the version of us before this storm erupted. No, he cut me off with a sharpness that felt like a slap across the face. His eyes, usually warm and filled with love, were now hard and cold, like shards of broken glass. We're done. My knees weakened, and I had to steady myself on the armrest of the couch. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. Not so abruptly. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words tangled in my throat, refusing to come out. How do you argue with someone whose trust you've completely shattered? How do you undo the damage when the evidence of your betrayal is out there for everyone to see? He didn't wait for my response. I've already contacted my lawyer. He continued, his voice devoid of emotion now. You'll be receiving the divorce papers soon. I suggest you start preparing. I stared at him, my mind racing. The reality of what I had done was hitting me in waves, each one more suffocating than the last. I had destroyed us. I had destroyed him. And now, I was left with nothing but the echoes of my own mistakes. When I finally found the strength to move, I walked to the door, my suitcase in tow. Each step felt like a march of shame, a silent admission of guilt. I turned to look at Greg one last time, hoping for even a glimmer of forgiveness, but he wouldn't meet my gaze. He stared out the window, his posture rigid and unyielding. I stepped out into the cold evening, my life in shambles. The affair had cost me everything. My marriage, my reputation, and the fragile illusion of stability I had clung to for so long. I had no idea where to go or how to start over. The reality of my actions weighed heavily on my chest, suffocating me with regret. As I walked away from the home we had built together, memories of our life flashed before me. The laughter, the quiet evenings, the promises we had made. All of it felt like a cruel joke now, a reminder of what I had thrown away. The tears finally came, hot and relentless, but there was no one to comfort me. I was alone, and I had no one to blame but myself. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable stories that will keep you coming back for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.